The body perceived it before any thought. It perceived it in the skin, in the stomach, in the bones. There was a state of alertness that didn't need movement to exist. It was as if the silence had weight, and this weight rested on the shoulders from the moment the eyes opened. It wasn't an acute fear, the kind that appears and disappears. It was an ancient, settled fear, already mixed with the breath. Even when nothing happened, the body remained ready, as if it had learned that the absence of action could be just a different form of threat. Hunger no longer came as a surprise. At first, it had been a violent sensation, something that interrupted everything else. Then it became ingrained. It became part of the day, like the dust that accumulates in corners and that no one can see anymore. It wasn't just the emptiness in the stomach. It was the way the fingers lost strength, how the legs felt heavier when getting up, how the thoughts slowed down, as if each idea had to cross a swamp before arriving whole. Sometimes the hunger was so constant that it stopped hurting, and that was even worse, because when it didn't hurt, it meant that it had already been incorporated into the body as a rule. There was a negative expectation that settled in along with it. The certainty that nothing existed there to alleviate it. Nothing came to improve things. Nothing arrived to correct them. The world, in that space, had ceased to offer good surprises, and the body organized itself around this idea as if it were a law of nature. A kind gesture was not expected because expecting was dangerous. Hope, when it appeared, was followed by a fall, and the body remembered. It remembered before the mind. The silence was broken only by imposed routines, footsteps at fixed times, a short command, a metallic clang, the dragging of something heavy on the other side. The repetition had a strange effect. It seemed to shape the days, but it also made time seem endless. Everything repeated itself, and yet nothing was resolved. The repetition was proof that the war continued outside and also inside at a pace that didn't depend on gunfire. Her eyes learned to stay on the ground, not out of humility, but out of calculation. Looking too much drew attention. Not looking was a way to get by. And getting by was the most discreet objective of all. To get through another day without being chosen for anything, to get through another line, to get through another cold night, to get by without reason or explanation. The lack of explanation was normal. The body didn't ask. The body only prepared itself. Sometimes someone nearby would make a small sound, a swallowed cough, a short sigh, and that sound seemed too loud, as if it could be heard for miles. That was how the silence worked. Anything within it became a betrayal. That's why even breathing was controlled. Inhale slowly, exhale carefully, no coughing, no complaining, no showing. The whole body became a contained thing, molded so as not to produce anything that could be interpreted as resistance. The cold helped maintain this restraint. It seeped into the clothes as if they didn't exist. It climbed up the ankles, settled in the calves, stiffened the knees. There were moments when the fingers seemed to belong to someone else, distant, asleep, and yet the body remained alert. It was an alert without energy, an alert that existed despite the fatigue, like an exhausted animal that still raises its head at the slightest crack. That's what war did to some people. It no longer needed explosions to be present. It became a way of being in the world, a way of waiting, a way of clenching your teeth without realizing it, a way of accepting that the day would bring nothing more than what it had already been bringing. The mind even tried to distract itself with anything, an old memory, an image of home, someone's face, but the body pulled it back to the now, to the immediate need, to the silent rule that governed that place: don't wait. And yet, there was always a point where the body, for a second, forgot the rule. Not by choice, not by courage, by weakness, by human habit. A minimal inclination towards something that resembled life, a reflex that escaped before the discipline. It was rare, but it happened. And when it happened, it came accompanied by shame, because desiring something there, anything simple, seemed improper, as if need were a sign of weakness, as if admitting hunger were giving the world dangerous information. None of this was said aloud. Almost nothing was said. What existed was the weight of routine and the certainty that the next sound, the next step, the next command could change everything. And the body remained there, waiting without waiting, vigilant even when still, tired even when awake, trapped in an old feeling that the mind was always too late. Over time, hunger ceased to be an event. It became a method. It no longer arrived as a surprise nor as an emergency. It was always there, occupying a fixed space, like an old piece of furniture that no one remembered putting there, but that no one could remove either. The body learned to function around it, getting up more slowly, sitting down without haste, calculating each movement as if energy were something that could not be wasted. Thinking about food required a conscious effort to avoid, not because the desire had disappeared, but because thinking made everything more difficult. The mind was capable of creating overly detailed images, a piece of bread, a hot dish, a smell coming from the kitchen. These images came complete, almost physical, and then went away, leaving an even greater void. Therefore, learning not to think became a form of protection. Thought needed to be shallow, functional, limited to what was immediately necessary to get through the day. There was also shame, a silent shame, faceless, without witnesses. Shame at desiring something so simple. Shame at feeling the body crave it, as if the need revealed a flaw, as if needing meant admitting there was still something to lose. Hunger wasn't just a physical condition, it was an exposure. It reminded the body that it still expected some answer from the world, even when experience said that answer wouldn't come. Over time, a discrete belief developed, never formulated in words, but rigorously followed. The idea that scarcity was normal. That lack was not a problem to be solved, but a permanent state to be managed. Survival came to mean adjusting expectations downwards, far downwards, to the point where expecting something more seemed naive, and naivete there was dangerous. The body cooperated with this belief. It reduced signals, it silenced requests. The stomach complained less, not because it was satisfied, but because it had learned that complaining produced no response. It was a slow learning process imposed by repetition. Day after day, nothing came, nothing changed, and little by little, hunger ceased to be an alarm and became a constant, almost neutral background. This altered the way we looked at others. There was no open comparison, but there was observation. Who seemed weaker, who moved with more difficulty, who took longer to get up. Scarcity created a silent attention to the other's body, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition. Everyone was being taught by the same absence. Each reacted as they could. Waiting ceased to be an emotionally safe option. When it existed, it came without expectation. It was an empty wait, without any image of what might come, just time passing, just the next moment. The body accepted this with weary obedience. There was no visible revolt. There was no clear resistance. There was adaptation. And this adaptation had a cost that didn't appear immediately, but accumulated silently. Gradually, hunger taught more than just the lack of food. It taught not to project into the future. It taught not to desire clearly. It taught that needing too much could attract unwanted attention. And so the body closed itself off a little more each day, convinced that surviving meant, above all, not expecting anything. Fear no longer needed a voice. It came before the word, before the gesture. The sound of different footsteps, firmer, heavier, was enough for the body to react on its own. Muscles contracted without conscious command. Backs straightened in an ancient reflex. The gaze lowered even before meeting any face. The uniform did this. It didn't matter who was inside it. The fabric carried a meaning learned by force. The presence of authority wasn't assessed. It was felt. Felt in the sudden tightness in the chest, in the shortness of breath, in the impulse to shrink one's own space. The body tried to occupy less space, as if that could reduce the risk. No one taught this behavior in words. It was absorbed, repeated, engraved through small threats, observed punishments, consequences that didn't need explaining. When someone approached wearing that uniform, thought became secondary. There was no time to reason, to gauge intentions, to imagine alternatives. The reaction came completely, automatically, to remain motionless, to await instructions, not to anticipate questions. Obedience was not moral submission. It was a defense mechanism, a way to get through the encounter unnoticed. His body stiffened as if preparing for an impact, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, hands motionless at his sides, fingers slightly curved, ready to obey, even before knowing how. It was a strange state because it mixed readiness and helplessness. Being ready for anything, knowing that he controlled nothing. There was a learned certainty that accompanied each approach, that nothing was offered without cost. If something came, it came with a demand. If something was given, it would be demanded later, in some way. This certainty didn't need to be confirmed every time. It was enough that it had been confirmed a few times, enough to become a rule, enough to shape expectations. Therefore, any unexpected gesture caused discomfort. The body didn't know where to fit anything that deviated from the norm. The logic was simple and rigid. Authority meant risk. Closeness meant threat. And within this logic, the best response was not to overreact, not to smile, not to cry, not to show anything that could be interpreted as a challenge or weakness. Fear also dictated time. The approach made the seconds stretch out. Each step seemed to last longer than it should. The sound of the moving fabric, the faint noise of the equipment, everything gained an exaggerated clarity. The body registered details that the mind did not request, as if it were gathering evidence for a threat that had not yet taken shape. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, a constant weary vigilance that wouldn't switch off even when the immediate danger had passed. Even after the uniform was removed, the body took a long time to relax. The tension lingered for a few more minutes, as if it were necessary to confirm that the risk had truly gone. Thus, fear ceased to be a one-off response and became a state carried silently every day. Uniform didn't need to do anything. It already did. It already carried with it everything that had been learned before, and the body once again obeyed without thinking, convinced that overthinking could be costly. There were times when nothing happened for too long. No instructions, no clear gestures, no words to define what was to come, just waiting. And with it, a kind of tension that had nowhere to rest. When an order came, it at least contained the fear. Silence did not. It left everything open-ended. Prolonged waiting created a different kind of fatigue. It wasn't the fatigue of a body that moves, but of a body that remains still out of obligation. Standing still demanded constant attention. Every muscle needed to be controlled so as not to betray impatience, discomfort, or nervousness. The entire body became vigilant of itself, and this was more exhausting than any physical exertion. No one asked anything. To ask meant to expose oneself. Not knowing was shared, but never discussed. Eyes remained lowered, not only out of fear but by silent agreement. It was safer not to look for answers in the other's face. Breathing became short, measured. Inhaling too much could sound like anxiety. Exhaling too quickly could seem like nervousness. Even the rhythm of the heart needed to be tamed. Time there followed no known rules. Minutes stretched as if they were hours. Each second seemed to carry a bad possibility. The body tried to anticipate the worst as a form of emotional protection. If the worst was already expected, perhaps it would hurt less when it arrived. This anticipation brought no relief, but it gave a feeling of some control, a fragile control, almost imaginary, but enough to get through the wait. The silence amplified everything. The slightest movement around took on exaggerated importance. A distant step, an object being placed on a surface, a brief metallic sound. Each noise was analyzed without words, only felt. The body reacted with small adjustments, renewed tension in the shoulders, a firmer jaw, even more still hands. It was as if the waiting demanded a permanent state of preparedness. There was also the weight of not knowing who would be called. The uncertainty didn't choose visible targets. Anyone could be next, or no one. This indecision created an uncomfortable equality. Everyone was equally exposed, and at the same time each carried the fear alone, in silence, without sharing, without confirming. When nothing happened for too long, a strange confusion arose. Part of the body longed for something to finally happen, anything to end the waiting. Another part feared precisely that. It was a difficult contradiction to sustain, to want the tension to end and to fear what might come next. The silence fueled this ambiguity until it became exhausting. Prolonged immobility caused the body to ache in subtle ways. A tingling in the legs, a heaviness in the shoulders, a discomfort that couldn't be relieved with a simple adjustment of position. The body learned to endure even that. It learned not to react to its own discomfort. The small pain was ignored because the big pain always seemed possible. Thus, silence became an active presence. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was a form of control, a space where anything could happen, and precisely for that reason, nothing needed to be said. And the body once again obeyed. It remained motionless, attentive, prepared for an order that didn't yet exist, but that already seemed to weigh on everyone. It was something too small to justify such an immediate reaction, a detail out of place, a smell that didn't match the space. It wasn't strong, nor clear enough to be identified immediately. Precisely for that reason, it caused strangeness. The body perceived it before understanding it. There was an internal movement, almost imperceptible, as if something had been pulled from the inside out without warning. The stomach reacted first, not with pain, but with recognition, an ancient, forgotten recognition that should no longer exist there. The body responded on its own, without asking permission from the logic built up over the months. There was a tightening, followed by a brief, almost shameful impulse. Desire appeared mixed with fear, so close that it was difficult to separate them. The physical reaction was immediate and impossible to completely contain. A slight adjustment of posture, a sudden stiffening, as if it were necessary to protect itself from its own reflex. The mind tried to intervene, tried to remember the rules, tried to remember that nothing there made sense if it didn't come with risk. But the body had already gone a step further. It had already registered the incongruity. The smell shouldn't exist in that place. It didn't match the cold, the metal, the dust, the harsh routine that governed everything. It was a strange element, almost out of place, like a memory that surfaces at the wrong moment, and precisely for that reason, it aroused suspicion. If something seemed too human, it needed to be examined carefully. Nothing there was gratuitous. Nothing came without consequence. Confusion settled in silently. Desire, fear, and caution mingled in a single instant. The body wanted to get closer, even without moving the feet. The mind pulled back, remembering everything that had been learned. It was a short, intense internal struggle, fought without words. A second that seemed longer than it should have been. Accepting that it was real required letting go of a painstakingly built protection. The protection of not expecting anything, of not trusting signs that seemed too kind. The body hesitated, trapped between the memory of what it had once been human and the harsh reality of the present. There was a fear that it was all just another trap of expectation. No one moved immediately. Silence returned to fill the space, but now it carried a different quality. It wasn't just tension, it was doubt. An uncomfortable doubt because it opened a crack where before there had only been negative certainty. And certainties, even harsh ones, were easier to sustain than questions. The body remained rigid, but something had changed. A different kind of heightened awareness spread through the senses. The smell lingered, subtle, persistent. It didn't intensify, it didn't disappear. It simply remained, as if awaiting some decision that no one felt ready to make. And, in that instant, It became clear that something in the logic of war had been slightly displaced. Not broken, just misaligned enough to cause unease. The body knew it. Even without understanding how, it knew that that moment didn't fit with the rest, and that feeling in itself was already disturbing. The gesture came without warning. It wasn't preceded by an order, nor accompanied by an explanation. It happened in a way too simple to be understood immediately. A short, almost mechanical action, performed as if it carried no meaning whatsoever. And yet everything in the body reacted as if something important had been touched. There was no speech, not a single word to justify what was being done. This absence of speech was part of the impact. If there had been an explanation, perhaps it would have been easier to suspect. Perhaps it would have been possible to fit the gesture into some known logic. But what was presented there did not seem to require interpretation. It simply existed. The body awaited the punishment that usually followed any deviation from routine. It awaited the scream, the abrupt movement, the corrective gesture. Nothing happened. Seconds passed, and nothing was demanded in return. This absence of immediate consequence was almost more disturbing than any threat. The body wasn't prepared for this. It knew the cost of things well. This had no visible cost. There was a moment of suspension, a moment when no one moved, as if any reaction could break something too fragile to be named. The mind searched for flaws, signs of a trap, hidden motives. The body, however, began to respond in another way. The tension in the shoulders eased slightly before it was consciously allowed. The breath slowed an inch. It was little, but it was real. Dignity did not return in a grand way. There was no redemption, no feeling of complete relief. It was something much smaller, a discreet touch on what still remained of humanity, a silent recognition that there were people there, not just obedient bodies. This recognition did not need to be declared. It manifested itself in the way the gesture was made, without haste, without threat. The body felt it before it understood. It felt it in the almost imperceptible shift in internal weight, as if something had been put back in its place for a moment. It didn't solve anything. It didn't change the situation. But it interrupted the logic that said everything there existed only to hurt, control, and take away. There was also the fear of acceptance. To accept meant admitting that the rigid logic built for survival had a flaw. And flaws were dangerous. Even so, the body relaxed a little more, betraying its own caution. It was a short, restrained relaxation, as if it were just a test, a quick rehearsal, ready to be interrupted at the first sign of risk. No one thanked them. No one said anything. The language there didn't allow for that kind of response. The gesture didn't seem to expect recognition, and that somehow made everything heavier. Because when you don't ask for anything in return, the action takes on a different weight, a weight that can't be easily repaid. When the moment passed, it left no clear trace. There was no way to comment on it. There was no way to record it. But something had shifted. An old certainty had been slightly weakened. The idea that war erased everything no longer held the same weight, not because the war had ended, but because at that instant it had failed to completely erase what remained. The body kept this in silence, not as hope, but as a sensory memory, a discrete record that, even on that side, something had escaped the logic of violence, and this record would remain, quiet, influencing the way of feeling long after the gesture had already ended. Some people move on, others stay a little longer. The stories continue here for those who choose to stay.